Chapter 19. Well, how's that suit you, Pike? Make you feel a little better? Galloway grinned jovial at this weak jest, his rage against the other man forgotten in his overwhelming relief. Under the circumstances, I don't reckon Stevens has any further interest in you. Mace moved towards Lawler as he talked, motioning the lawman down off his horse. Scowling, Jess slid stiffly to the ground. Lift your hands on out of the way there, Lawler, about shoulder height. He was thoroughly enjoying himself, boldly investigating the other man's pockets in his search for the keys. Breathing hard, Jess submitted under the steady, beady eye of a carbine-carrying renegade. At this moment, there could be no angrier man in Powder Valley. And Pat, he read his bitter mood. For crucial days and weeks, the sheriff had refused to believe in the remote possibility of Mace Galloway's perfidy. It was all coming home to roost now with pitiless force. Lawler would never forget the lesson. How much it could help him now was an open question, though. Mace found the keys, and hauling them out, he proceeded to free himself from the handcuffs and then tossed them carelessly aside. Ought to snap 'em on Stevens, he grunted, but I'll do better than that. How about letting me go to work on 'em? Ute urged, staring intently at Pat, against whom he appeared to entertain an instinctive apathy. He seems like a nosy hombre. Mace took his meaning, his eye dropping to the leveled carbine. No, he ruled promptly. No use giving some U.S. Marshal a better cause for following us, boys. I don't need no truck with the law, and Lawler's a reasonable man. He grinned wolfishly. I aim to discourage this bunch. If I have to do it the hard way later on, that'll come too. Don't be making no mistakes now, Galloway. Taggart's exclamation was taut and hard. I warn you, Stevens knows about Bluestem. He's been there, and so has Morgan and that fat runt. He jerked a thumb at Sam. They're all a bull-headed crowd. Stop 'em cold and be done with it. Candace gasped at this cool proposition of wholesale killing. Mace took his pleasure in scrutinizing their blank faces, as if toying with the idea. He had been brought up in a stern school. It was not beyond him to follow the dictations of self-preservation, regardless of where they led him. But, with an avenue of escape open, he could be level-headed as well about the future. Shoot one and you'd have to knock 'em all off, he declared dourly. But that skinny one-eyed buzzard ain't here, and I don't like that. He shook his head. And don't be forgetting they downed Tex, the foreman interjected angrily. I'll make someone sweat for that and be damned about it. Well, no doubt you would. Galloway was softly firm, but I ain't forgetting that you're in a different boat from the rest of us. Not that I rightly blame you for wanting us in there with you, Pike. There was acid in his impugnant smirk. Tex, he took his chance, and from here on out, you're on your own too. With a smooth movement, he lifted Sheriff Lawler's 6-gun and thrust it into his own empty holster. As methodically, he confiscated the weapons of the others, tossing them to a flat-faced Confederate. Morgan, too, courageously made an attempt to thrust him back angrily, only to slip in the snow steadily that was gathering underfoot. One of the renegades promptly banged him alongside the head with a rifle barrel, and Ray staggered, nursing the bruise. Seems to be a hot-headed young bugger, Mace remarked, tossing Morgan's Colt amongst the others. Gotta know how to handle a hedgehog. He turned to one of his silent men. Hey, Arkansas, get some rope there in the shack. I want you to tie Stevens up there so I can see it, and Pop, he'll help you. Arkansas brought the rope, a stout manila lariat. He and the creased-faced old rawhide called Pop went methodically about trussing up Pat in such a manner that he could hardly move a finger. There. Mace scrutinized the knots jealously, trying various strands of the rope for tightness. I reckon that'll do. Now for Lawler's part. Just Lawler's stiff-necked dignity found it impossible to submit to this indignation without a severe protest. You're only slamming the door on yourself, Galloway, he burst out forcefully, cheeks a-trembling. Mace laughed. Well, so long as it stands betwixt you and me, Lawler, I won't be kicking. So, little troubled by scruples, did the renegades appear that they bound the lawman even more roughly and firmly. With Stevens, he was dragged inside the cabin and tumbled into the floor. Sam was next, submitting in a hard-eyed silence, his lips puffed out, and Roof Dad was similarly treated. Morgan watched proceedings with a steadily mounting hostility. I'll throw a rope over this girl, Galloway, and I'll follow you to hell, he ejected with a suppressed fury. Mace's regard was cool. Well, I wouldn't think of it, boy. Can't be treating the ladies in such a shabby fashion. His tone was oily with delayed malice. In fact, he added neglectfully, as some of the uneasiness faded from Morgan's face, she's coming along as our insurance. Alarm leapt afresh in Morgan's hard, flat cheeks. What's that? You mean you don't get it? Mace's innocence was exaggerated. Why, she's coming along with us, Ray, just in case you should take a notion some day to crowd us a wee bit too close. Ray's lean features went to fury with desperation. For 10 seconds his wrath made the air blue. Where are you taking her? He blazed. Galloway shrugged. Well, you might locate her again someday. She might maybe find her way back if she feels up to it. With the ropes already entangling his legs, Morgan lunged at him, his face murderous. Mace casually stepped aside and then flattened him with a heavy blow. His voice suddenly altered. Damn good, he growled. Stuff a gag in his chops. He grew busy taking a final look at Pat and Sheriff Lawler and glancing about the cabin. Shake it up, will you? We're getting out of here. Her face bloodless, the girl stared at him, standing alone in the center of the cabin. Galloway avoided her eye, tossing her coat at her carelessly. Climb into that, and whatever else you can find is going to be a rough going today. Numbly, she followed the instructions. Pat watched her with concern as long as she remained in sight. Galloway lost no time in thrusting her outside, and the renegades followed, leaving the slab door swinging. Better pull that door, too, they heard Utes' grating mutter, drifting in through the opening. Somebody's liable to find 'em too quick if they get to be yelling. I'll let it go. Galloway's response was curt. No one's going to be cruising in this storm. With the door open, the cold will do as good a job as a gun, and it can't be chalking up to us. Their lowered voices died out, and snow swirled in over the cabin threshold, and chill gusts drove smoke down the chimney. In the hushed silence, the 5 bound men lay listening to the faint sounds of a hasty departure from outside. These ceased with the dying out of the sodden hoof stomps. The silence was heavier than ever. Sloane was the first to find his voice. Galloway hit it plumb center, he growled at last. We'll freeze in here as soon as that fire dies out. Just Lawler heaved about, ineffectually tugging at his bonds. His tone was dour. Can you move at all, Stevens? Well, I can roll around a wee bit. That's about it, Pat sounded. Well, I can wiggle my hands a little, Sam offered. You can? Pat caught at that. Well, that's a little better than the rest of us. Hold on a sec. and a daint of a painful contortions, he succeeded in propping himself partially against the rough log wall, from which position he at least could obtain a partial view about the dusky interior. "It's a tight wad line camp," he grunted. "Not much laying around to work with." He frowned, continuing to scan the shadows, and at length spoke tensely. "Morgan." He craned his neck to look towards the spot where the star-crossed man lay. "Are you able to roll yourself over?" Gagged as he was, Ray was as keenly alert to their desperate situation as any. He promptly rolled over onto his back, and heaved mightily and flopped over again. "Good," Pat approved. "Listen now. There's an old tin can there against the wall on the other side of you. You're the nearest. Perhaps you can scooch around and get a rope over the sharp edge somehow and do some sawing away." Ray was only too willing to try anything, but he could not see what he was doing, trusted up as stiffly and nearly as immovable as he was. Following Pat's eager directions, he floundered against the wall and located the old can and set to work. Try as he would, however, he had no luck. Again and again, with panting effort, he got that can into position in its ragged edges against the ropes of his arms, and each time the slightest movement only tumbled the can over, and he had to do it all over again. "Hold on," Pat exclaimed finally in vexation. "Let it go, Red. You're blue in the face now from that danged gag in your mouth." He waited while Morgan lay resting. When he spoke again, his tone was thoughtful. "Well, here's a new idea. There's a flag iron there propped in the corner yonder. See if you can't kick it out over here." Ray strove mightily, rolling himself this way and that, and at length succeeded in knocking the branding iron into the middle of the floor. Sloane was mystified. "What you can do with that?" "Work the end into the fire before it goes out altogether." Pat spoke quickly. Sam got into the game, rolling about, kicking with his pudgy little legs, and even Lawler followed their struggles with concern. At length, the iron was maneuvered into the fire. It was well now that the open door afforded some slight draught, for the flames were dying. They waited hopefully, and it was Pat who finally kicked the smoking iron out onto the floor. "Wait up there," he exclaimed as Sam began at once to roll towards it. "You want to burn yourself good?" "Well, what use will it be then?" Sam was half frantic with impatience. Pat showed him, shoving his boot against the iron so that a coil of rope came in contact with it. The cherry red glow of the iron was already beginning to fade, but it was still hot enough. A curl of rank smoke arose, and Pat wriggled his foot, flinching from the heat, and he tried again and again. Soon the rope parted. "Gracious, Stevens!" Sam was incredulous. "You're plumb smart now. You gotta work with your teeth." Pat ignored the jibe, but by dint of kick and rubbing, he finally got several coils loosened, and a moment later his legs were partially free. He crawled over towards Sam, backing up against him. "Get busy with those wiggling fingers." With unholy glee, Sam clawed at the relaxed bonds, and Pat's arms were loose. Picking up at the knots clumsily, Sam got one started. A moment later, Pat rose, freed, and tossed off the last of the ropes. "We did her." He turned first to Morgan, tore away the gag as quickly as he could work it loose, and swiftly he released the others. "Well," after stretching stiffly, Sam threw more wood upon the fire and jammed the door. "Nice going. We got ourselves loose, but here we are stuck." Morgan had already pushed outside, quick with anxiety. He came in after a few minutes, fresh snow on his hat and shoulders, his face strained. "They didn't leave a single horse, Stevens, and it's snowing even heavier now." Rufe Dad silently confirming this finding with a shake of the head. Pat had expected as much. Galloway would not leave anything to chance at this stage of the game, and he turned to Lawler. "One of those things, Jess. I I should have thought of Mace's gang." "Oh, you did good." The sheriff was chafing his bloodless arms back to life. "Left alone, I'd still be snarling in them ropes. We know now where we stand, and that's something." "But where does Candace stand?" Morgan whipped out. Pat was gentle with him. "We'll square that. You keep a stiff upper lip, boy. It could be bad, I know." "Well, it couldn't look no worse. Where are we going to get some horses inside of half a day, and with this storm a blowing, Galloway's tracks will be covered in fine style?" The young fellow was sounding hopeless. "I don't know." Pat had already buttoned his jacket about his throat. "Mace's ranch, it can't be more than 2 or 3 miles away. And not a soul there, or else it'd be bristling with guns." "Well, we'll make our play for the horses," Pat pursued levelly. "No use fighting that battle till we come to it." So Pat turned to the door. "Are we all set?" After warming their reddened hands a last time at the fire, they stepped outside. The storm had steadily increased in intensity, with snow was piling against the walls, plastering to the pine trunks. Churning flakes drove by in a ceaseless blast, and it was difficult to see beyond the immediate surrounding trees. His back to the wind, Pat pointed out their direction. "We'll angle up the canyon and cut straight across. It'll be tough going any way we figure it, and it's no tougher that way." The snow, silted down with ominous persistence, was as yet little more than a hazard underfoot. It made climbing arduous. They fought their way up the canyon side, boots skidding treacherously on the white blanketed pine needles. At the crest, Pat sighted a course through the rolling, ghostly forest. It was not easy to maintain a given direction, and they might speedily lose themselves, but the pines helped. They stumbled on, snow brushing down their backs, a moody, plodding group. An hour later, Pat led the way down a long slope through the howling blizzard, and they almost stumbled into a blank log wall. "Hey!" Sam brushed the snow off his bushy eyebrows. "What's this?" Pat was short. "It's the rear of one of Galloway's shed, I think." This proved out to be the case, and the big headquarters building, completely shrouded in a swirling snow, was not far away. Stealthily, they reconnoitered. The flag ranch appeared to be wholly deserted. Sam came puffing back after a tour of the corrals, a scowl upon his face. "There ain't one dang living horse upon the place, Stevens," he burst out disgustedly. Pat spread his hands, and Ray Morgan emitted a groan, and Lawler gravely considered the situation. "Wasn't figuring on running into Galloway again here, was you?" he asked mildly. "Yes, Lawler, I thought we might." Surprised at the other's acumen, Pat drove on. "With Galloway pushing into outlawry, he'd never leave this country without scooping up whatever movable piece of property there might be, money and so forth." "Well, I'm seeing if there's any guns around at least," Sam growled. He boldly sought a door and pushed into a ranch house. The others followed. That someone had preceded them here was quite plain. Galloway's office desk was a tumbling mess. A small iron safe stood open. Sam succeeded in finding a forgotten 6-gun that was hanging in a bunk room, and Lawler located another in a drawer. Pat came out of an upstairs closet carrying a Winchester. "Mace never thought of his guns, that's for sure," he commented, holding out the rifle. "Swap with me, Sam. I want you down the yard in one of those sheds. If anyone comes, flush them towards the house here, will you?" Sam blinked. "You mean you're still expecting them to come back?" "In this storm?" Pat was curt. "They couldn't help themselves. It's pretty lively out there. Get going." His calm assurance enlivened them all. It was true that the storm had grown violent, a freezing blast that no man of sense would have chosen to face. Galloway might well seek safety in a return to here, as slim as a hope as it might be. Taking the rifle, Sam headed for the door. "Rufe will go with you, Solon," Lawler said gruffly, and he motioned to the deputy, and they stepped out. Morgan chucked the iron wood stove door, which, already burning, could hardly betray their presence. "You're a great hand for playing a long shot, Stevens," he said gloomily. "I wish I could persuade myself that Mace will be back here and bring Candace with him." Pat smiled. "Well, it'd help if you just pick a window and keep yourself an eye peeled." It was not 20 minutes before Morgan, standing beside the south window, vented a surprised yelp. "By gracious, here they come! They're coming back!" Pat ran to look, with Lawler at his heels. And sure enough, a half-dozen horsemen came butting into the yard, heads down. They were making for the house. All but beaten, they flashed to sudden life as a gun cracked flatly out there, and men slid down behind horses. At least 3 figures came hurrying towards the house. "It's Galloway!" Ray exclaimed. "But hold your fire, Stevens. He's pushing Candace ahead of him." Pat waited beside the door, muscles tense, and it slammed open. And as the girl stumbled past, Pat swung with all of his strength at the unsuspected outlaw that was pushing in after her. End of chapter 19.